Cornish Mutual, farming insurance experts.
Hello and welcome to a special episode of Farming Focus, the podcast for South West farmers brought to you by Cornish Mutual. I'm your host, Peter Green, and to start the year, we're thinking about what might be ahead for farmers this year and reviewing this year's Oxford Farming Conference, which took place last week. Winter is the time of year when many of the big UK farming conferences take place. And in the first week of January each year, there are two of them in Oxford. The Oxford Farming Conference, or OFC as it's often termed, was established around 90 years ago and is typically addressed by the Secretary of State for the Environment, who often uses the conference as a platform to launch their department's plans for the year ahead. The Oxford Real Farming Conference started in 2010 to provide a forum for different perspectives. Both are attended by many hundreds of people, with talks broadcast online for people to view at home. I'm joined today by Jeremy Oatey, who is Managing Director of Agricola Growers, a specialist farming company based in southeast Cornwall. Jeremy attended the Oxford Farming Conference last week. Jeremy, welcome to the show. It's great to have you back. What was your overall take on the Oxford Farming Conference?
Well, thank you for inviting me on, Peter. Good to chat to you again. Yeah, the Oxford Farming Conference is always, I find it always very interesting and very stimulating. You know, I first went sort of over 20 years ago. To be fair, back then it was seen as a little bit elitist, and it was a little bit sort of the established farming elite, if you like. But roll on 20 years up to today, and it's quite a different event. You know, it's not elitist at all. There's an awful lot of young people there. The conference have worked hard to provide many scholarships, and there's a real range of people, views, and different sort of day-to-day activities that they carry out.
So the Inspire programme is something that I know the Oxford Farming Conference have worked really hard on over the years, and that's something that you sort of alluded to there. And I guess if there's anyone, I believe, under the age of 40 that's interested in getting a scholarship to the conference, they can go onto the Oxford Farming Conference website and look that up. But for you, Jeremy, what were the sort of standout speakers or topics that were covered, or what particularly was being talked about away from the main conference floor?
Well, the theme of the conference was growing resilience. They always seem to sort of come up with a theme that they can hang many things on, and this year was no different, really.
Yeah.
Topics from, you know, politics, business, the environment, and right down to social resilience. Yeah, and a wide range of speakers. There generally tends to be a keynote address from the Princess Royal, who always gives the impression, and I'm sure that she really actually understands the farming industry very well and its challenges. And there's a guy, Dominic Waters, that spoke last year, and he comes from a fairly rundown housing estate in Kent. And his gripe, if you like, was that in many places, fresh vegetables and fruit wasn't really available in the shops around where he lived. There's a lot of processed food, and he was running a campaign, and as part of the sort of that campaign, he's actually found an unusual ally in the farming industry. He came back and gave an update on that campaign.
So he's from an urban background,
Yeah.
non-farming, and
Yeah.
he's managed to join forces with farming to improve. I guess that's a social resilience piece in his area. That's an interesting one. What other speakers really stood out for you then?
Well, obviously there's the first morning is particularly sort of on politics. The conference had commissioned a report by Dr. Louise Manning entitled UK Farming Grasping the Opportunities. And you know, that really went into some depth about UK farming and what it needs to look like going forward if it's going to survive and be profitable. And that, combined with the report by Baroness Batters on her review into farming profitability, the two reports between them generated quite a lot of debate at the conference. With the general view being that if the government sort of actually read those two reports and put them into action, the world could be a different place for the farming industry.
Yeah, so just a note on the Baroness Batters reviews. So Baroness Minette Batters is a crossbench peer. She was formerly the president of the NFU for 6 years and vice president before that. And she was asked to carry out a review of farm profitability in the UK. So in April of 2025, Baroness Batters was asked by the government to carry out a review of farm profitability in the UK. She finished that report in October, and there was concern that the government were just going to sit on that report, but they did publish it before Christmas, as they had said they would. I think the report runs to about 150 pages. There are many recommendations in there. Baroness Batters has taken the opportunity to go really broad. She's actually taken the scope of that report a bit broader than she was necessarily asked to in the first instance, and she's looked into things which include collaboration, which include food networks, which include inheritance tax, not just purely the farming side of things. It's a really interesting report. It's quite well written in terms of being able to access and just pick out the recommendations. I would suggest that anyone who's interested has a read of that. But the interesting thing now, Jeremy, I think you'll agree, is where the government go from here on that. They're saying that they are going to put together a farming roadmap, and that really is going to be their response. You talk about the report for the conference, but also Baroness Batters' review. What were people saying?
The report has been widely welcomed by the farming industry, as you would expect. We await DEFRA's response. At the minute, it's warm words from DEFRA.
Yeah.
They are talking a lot about their 25-year roadmap for food and farming. There is a view, yes, 25 years is fine, but actually we need a 5-year plan. We need a 10-year plan. There's a lot of change and a lot of churn going on at the moment, and to concentrate solely on what the world's going to be like in 25 years just seems too far out at the moment.
Yeah. And it's been a really interesting, I was going to say few months, probably a year and a half, in terms of the relationship between agriculture and government. Obviously, the budget of 2024 announced some proposed changes to inheritance tax around the APR and BPR thresholds, which we spoke about on a previous podcast with Brian Harvey, and I'd recommend anyone to go back and listen to that. But then just before Christmas 2025, the government changed their point of view and have changed the limits. I'm being really careful not to say U-turn. And to quote the secretary, they listened to farmers and changed the thresholds to 2.5 million, which can be transferred between spouses. So you can get up to 5 million, potentially plus more if you consider the primary residence thresholds. So they made some changes, but the concern is, because the changes have been made, that damage has been done to that relationship between farmers and government. We had a change of secretary. Steve Reed went, and Emma Reynolds came in as Secretary of State for the Environment. Angela Eagle is the farming minister. So it feels like there's been a lot of changes there. As we touched on, Emma Reynolds spoke to conference on that first morning in the political session. What were some of the key moments from what she said, but also that whole session?
Emma Reynolds is an experienced politician. She comes across as very sort of calm and collected. Despite what they might say, I think she is aware of what's happened in the relationship between the farming industry and the government over the last 14 months or so, and is aware that bridges need to be built, which is potentially quite difficult. But I suppose one of the key points really is that there is only a very limited amount of money that can go into the farming industry, regardless of the sort of political situation or the political governance. The NHS and defence are likely to be the main beneficiaries of government funding going forward. Agriculture and the environment is relatively small fish, really. But within that, she's got to try and do what she can. She does seem prepared to listen. But one of our sort of major announcements, really coming from the Batters Review, is that they're setting up what they call the Farming and Food Partnership Board, which is a new cross-industry board which will be chaired by Emma Reynolds as Secretary of State, and allegedly will give farmers a seat at the table in policy development. So
Yeah.
we'll see where that goes. Whether that's successful or not will come down to whether they manage to get the right people on the board, I suspect.
I was very fortunate to have a brief chance to speak with Peter Craven, so former guest on the podcast, one of our earlier episodes when he talked about the family charter, and that is well worth a listen. So do go back and have a listen to that. But he's presently the head of agriculture for Natural England, and I was asking him how that board is actually going to listen to farmers. It's warm words, but we really need farmers to be listened to and for policy to be put together with farmers' thoughts in mind. I don't know that there was a lot of clarity on how farmers are going to be listened to, and I think that's the concern with quite a few of these announcements. The headlines are coming out, and I thought Emma Reynolds' speech, which people can go and listen to either on the Oxford Farming Conference YouTube channel, or I think there's a link through DEFRA, it's worth listening to. And as you say, Jeremy, I thought she spoke well. I thought the speech was well written and was written with farmers in mind. There's a lot in there which was good to hear, but we do need more detail. So that Food and Farming Partnership Board's an interesting one. She also talked about a couple of other things. I don't know if you want to pick them one at a time, Jeremy.
Well, yeah, I suppose the big announcement, or sort of most anticipated announcement, really was around the SFI
That's
as
a sustainable farming incentive, one of the sort of nature-friendly farming schemes, which has been a little bit off and on over the last few years. So in March 2025, applications had been open, but after receiving a lot of applications, more than the budget would withstand, DEFRA suddenly pressed stop on any more applications being received. And that's another thing which I think really damaged that relationship of trust between farmers and government. So, sorry, go on, Jeremy.
Yeah, so the new SFI scheme, which will be opening in 2026, sounds like it's going to be more slimmed down, more targeted. There's going to be two application windows. The first will be in June 26, which will be for smaller farms and those that haven't been previously in an SFI scheme. Now, this gets quite interesting, because when pressed on what denotes a small farm, she did have to pause for a second or two and said, I think the definition is under 50 hectares, but that remains to be agreed.
It's a really interesting one, that. I mean, we farm 120 acres here. I think 52 hectares. So by that judgment, I would just miss out. And there will be a lot of people listening, a lot of the Cornish Mutual community who are just about that 50 hectare number. I think nationwide, the average farm size is 80 hectares, the average holding. So
Yeah,
there's going to be a lot of people that do miss out if that's where they pitch it.
yeah. There then will be a second window opening in September, which will be for any farm business to apply for. They were keen to assure us all that there'll be regular updates on progress, and no sudden closures so there'll be plenty of warnings. So the risk is that everybody sort of second guesses it in the run up to September, whacks in an application on the first, and it's shut by the third. But they're sort of assuring us that that's not going to be the case. But time will
Yeah.
tell.
I think one thing which I was quite interested in with the further comments on the sustainable farming incentive was that they've listened to farmers and they want to simplify the scheme and make it easier to apply. That sounds great. But then, in the same breath, Emma Reynolds went on to say that they're going to reduce the number of options. And I understand that reducing the number of options probably does make it certainly easier for DEFRA and possibly easier for farmers. But the Secretary of State also spoke about being serious about farming, producing food. And I just wonder how you feel, Jeremy, we can align these two ideas. The idea that DEFRA want more people to be able to access nature-friendly farming schemes such as the SFI, but also being serious about food production. And I don't know that the two necessarily meet. What are your thoughts on that?
The days of food production being subsidized in certainly in England, slightly different in the devolved nations, but
Yeah.
those days are gone. During one question time session, somebody did point out that actually we are sort of market leading in the world in the way that we're sort of approaching funding from an environmental perspective rather than a food production perspective. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? It's about finding the balance, but the key message that kept coming through the conference through many speakers really was you need to look at your own business, and the key phrase really was is your business investable? So would a third party, a bank, or anybody else come to that, be prepared to invest money in your business because you can generate sufficient return? Now, how you go about generating that return comes down to your specific set of circumstances. So is it out and out food production? Is it by accessing environmental funding, natural capital, that type of thing? Or is it, is it, do you need to change your business model radically? Louise Manning in her report sort of stated three types of business that she's come across, and she defined them as either doom loop, where you're convinced that there's not a lot of point. Drawbridge was a second definition, where you're pulling up the drawbridge and managing as best you can. Or the third type, which was basically opportunity driven businesses. And there was a lot of emphasis on the fact that if you're going to survive, you need to look at the opportunities. You need to sit down as a family. Most farming businesses are family businesses in one way, shape, or form. Sit down with your family and work out exactly what you do want. Why are you farming? What do you want to achieve? What should you keep doing? What should you stop doing? Or what could you do instead? I think.
Can you repeat those, Jeremy, please?
So the four things as a business: what do you want to achieve? What should we keep doing? What should we stop doing? And what can we do instead? And
love that.
Those 4 points are actually quite pertinent to most of our listeners, I guess.
I completely agree, but I think one of the things that if I'm putting myself in the shoes of some of my farming friends down here, and I'm going to be shouting at the podcast right now, is yes, but how do I have time for that? And that's something I've been really fortunate in the last 18 months to go around the world, look at different farming systems. And I'm particularly interested in the openness to change of farming businesses and how able we are to change. And this is exactly what you're talking about. It's the appetite for change. And actually, as farmers, and particularly small farmers, which we often are in the UK and certainly in the Southwest, we are expected to do everything. We are generally expected to be chief cook, bottle washer, finance director, head of operations, mechanic. We are doing so much, and to have the time and perspective to step back and look at our business in a different way and say, what can we do, is a real challenge. But actually, he wasn't necessarily the most popular Secretary of State, and I'm not endorsing him in any way, but Steve Reed did speak about farmers needing to be businessmen, and what you said at the beginning of your answer there was about considering our business and whether a bank would invest in it. And actually, that is something we hear more and more. And the New Zealand farming model is not perfect. I think we have quite often rose-tinted spectacles about what they do and how they do it. There are flaws in it, and some of the environmental things they do are different from ours. But one thing I will say about the New Zealand farmers that I met was that they are ruthlessly focused on their business. And we've got some very good farmers in the UK that understand cost of production and their numbers, and that's great. But actually, that's probably the top 25, maybe 30%. And we've got these farmers down at the bottom, perhaps those on the doom loop side of things, who, let's be honest, will probably eat bread and water to make sure that they are farming tomorrow and next year. But actually, these farmers in the middle, I'm really interested in this 50% in the middle. How can we make sure that they and their farms are fit for purpose in future? It's a real challenge, Jeremy, don't you think?
Yeah, it is a real challenge, and I don't think anybody was saying actually it's solely down to the farming businesses. Obviously, farming businesses need to recognise their strengths and weaknesses and what the opportunities and threats are to them. But there's also a lot of talk around enabling businesses to grow, thrive, and survive. So a number of sessions on trade and issues discussed, such as greater realignment with the EU post Brexit. There was a guy speaking who runs a lamb abattoir up in Shropshire, and he was quoted as saying that his costs for exporting lamb into Europe have increased by £500,000 a year post Brexit. So if the UK could achieve greater realignment, he could reduce a lot of those costs. That would then feed back through into the lamb price. Another one that's a little bit out of the Cornish Mutual area, but the lady from the Scottish Whisky Association stated that actually 44 bottles of whiskey are exported every second from Scotland. Yeah. But there's huge scope for growth in that sector. If trade barriers are reduced, the knock-on effect of that back to the farmer is, greater exports, greater demand for barley. That pulls the barley. If barley's pulled north, that helps us down here in the southwest. So everyone's a winner on that front. It's getting the environment right for businesses to survive. We all have to play our part, and the government's role really is to act as an enabler for this to take place. Against that, government wheels move very, very slowly. Have we got the time?
Yeah. It's a really interesting one. So I was speaking to some people last night who are in the ag industry down here, and I think the feeling was we can have the best SFI scheme that there is, and I think a lot of people felt the SFI was pretty good in its first few iterations once we'd got there. But actually, a bad trade deal can really undermine that. It can have a huge impact on the market, and we're in a different market now from what we were pre-Brexit, and to an extent I think we just need to get on with that. The situation in Europe, one of our biggest trading partners, is changing. So the way that their common agricultural policy is subsidizing their farmers isn't necessarily going down the green path that we are, and that can help them to produce things more cheaply. So that's a real threat to our market. And I think actually where I come back to, Jeremy, and the point I'm trying to make is, ultimately, I think provided we have a business with a clear set of goals and that we really know how to run that business properly, and we think about our business as an agri-business rather than farming on its own per se, then that really is the way we have to go. Is that fair? It all comes back to running a profitable business.
That is absolutely key. You may be a stockman at heart, but actually that sort of tourist bit of diversification within your business may be the bit that generates the bulk of your income. But that doesn't mean you're not a farmer and not part of the community. So it goes back to look at where the opportunities are. Make sure your business is robust. The other point was made. There's a guy called Jack Bobo who'd flown across from California to inspire us all, I think. And
did it work, Jeremy?
Well, he made quite a good point that the world population will continue to increase until 2050, and then it will start to drop off quite rapidly.
Yeah.
So we've got 25 years of increasing demand for food worldwide. And then all of a sudden, the landscape changes again.
Yeah.
So, how do we manage that? It's not a static thing.
I think the danger there is that people try and second guess and try and change what their farm is doing now for what happens in 2050, but actually that's still a generation away. And whilst it's really really important to have a vision for where you broadly want your business, whatever business it is, farming or otherwise, to be in that time frame, I think realistically, we need to make sure that we've got a profitable business in the next few years. So it's kind of having a direction of travel, but making sure the journey to get there is a profitable one. Some
Mm.
food for thought there. And Jack Bobo is definitely someone that I recommend that listeners look up. He's on a number of other podcasts. It'd be lovely if we could get him on this one. He was a director of food policy, I think, at the University of Nottingham for a long time. And
Was for a
so,
while, yeah.
yeah, really, really interesting guy to listen to. Very charismatic speaker. So, Jeremy, as we come towards the end of the podcast, I want you to dust off your crystal ball and maybe just take a step back from the Oxford Farming Conference and look at 2026, the year ahead. What are your hopes, dreams, expectations, and what are the challenges going to be?
Gosh, well, the thing that overrides everything is the weather, but I suspect that's not much we can do about that one. Um, I think from my sort of personal perspective, I would like a clear direction of travel for the industry, or a clearer direction of travel for the industry. The last 18 months have not been great, really. From my personal business perspective, I don't know. My various schemes are coming to an end. I've no idea whether I can take them forward. I can't budget properly because I don't know.
Yeah.
The industry does need to feel like it is supported by the government, and that needs to be more than warm words. Government procurement and sort of out of home food service doesn't seem to quite match up to the requirements and the hoops that we need to jump through to supply supermarkets, and that seems to be a very slow burn getting that to the same standard and the
Yeah.
same requirements.
The government target 50% of public procurement coming from UK farms, I think. And I don't know who's holding them to account on that and what the timeline is, but it doesn't feel, from speaking to producers. I was speaking to an egg producer last night, and they said that they can't get near to selling eggs into the House of Commons. The French eggs are, much more able to
Yeah.
sell into the House of Commons, which doesn't feel right, does it?
No, no, and I think these sort of imbalances in trade need to be addressed. I think as an industry, the industry has always adapted and gone forward, but it needs to be treated fairly. And there is a distinct danger that a lot of what we do will be regulated out in this country, but the demand will stay there, and it'll just draw in product produced to lesser standards from elsewhere. Everybody knows these things, really, but we need a call to action by the government to actually get on and start sorting some of this out. It's laid out for them here in the various reports that have been produced. I'm hopeful that they will take a lot of these points on board, and it won't be lost in amongst the day-to-day political activity, and that something productive does come of it.
Yeah. So more challenging weather, more challenging political conditions, which we need to take forward in terms of our relationship with government. We need government and farmers to try and work more closely together, so that there is that trust, so that we can invest and plan with a real intent. I think those are messages loud and clear. In terms of markets, I mean, we know that the dairy price is under pressure at the moment, with worldwide supply being at a really high level. Red meat, we're at quite a high level on that already. It doesn't feel like there's a lot of places that can go. And Jeremy, you're a mixed farmer, so you've got cattle, but also combinable crops. That's a difficult industry to be in, a difficult sector to be in at the moment, isn't it?
Yes, very. I think you've got to take a longer term view, and it's no good looking at 1 year in isolation. We just need to know our cost base and actually not be afraid to not do it if it doesn't work.
Yeah, I think that's a really important piece.
That shouldn't be seen as failure. Actually, that should be seen as good business management.
And that comes back to those questions, what do we want to achieve? What do we want to keep doing? What do we want to stop doing? And what do we do instead? I think that really bears through there.
Yeah. I made a list here of the sort of key points as the conference was going along. The point number 1 was, is your business investable? Point 2 is, have you got a family roadmap so you know what your plan is? Third point was really to be prepared to grasp opportunities and adapt your business as and when required. And then finally, stop being reliant on the government. There's a big transition going on. The government is only likely to be there to help facilitate things. It's not going to support us, particularly as an industry, other than for very specific areas.
Wow, gosh, lots to think about there. So we've got to make sure we have investable businesses that are producing a yield, that are profitable. We've got to be adaptable and ready to grasp opportunities. And the first thing that comes to mind there with my accountancy hat on is we need to have access to funds if we're going to be able to do that, which is definitely a challenge for most businesses. And I think cash flow is going to be a big issue in 2026, particularly with falling dairy prices and then possibly tax bills from previous better years. We need to stop being reliant on the government. They're a facilitator and not necessarily someone who's going to hold us up artificially. So with that in mind, Jeremy, and bringing the podcast to a close, what's your message for farmers at the start of 2026?
The farming industry has proved to be remarkably resilient for many, many years, and I don't see any reason why that's going to change. The goalpost may be moving a bit, but I'm confident the industry's here to meet the challenge.
Fantastic. Lovely. Great to end on a positive. Jeremy, thank you so much for joining us for this special podcast to start 2026 on Farming Focus. We are here for the rest of the year. We have the rest of Series 6 starting very soon, and we look forward to you joining us then. We've talked at length today about 2026, and we'd love to hear from you, our listeners, about how you see 2026 panning out. What are your predictions for your sector, and what are you hopeful about? Or perhaps there are other particular topics or people that you would love us to feature here on the Farming Focus podcast in our 6th series. So for any feedback or comments, do send us an email to podcast@cornishmutual.co.uk. Check out the show notes for more information on today's episode, including the link to our podcast disclaimer. You've been listening to Farming Focus, brought to you by Cornish Mutual. I've been Peter Green. Until next time, it's goodbye from me and everyone in the Cornish Mutual podcast team.
Cornish Mutual, farming insurance experts.